My name is Nathan, and I want to start this one with a confession. For 18 years, I have made my living looking at things other people swear are fine. I read the film. Metal that a crew called perfect. A weld a foreman signed off on with a smile. I put it under radiation, and the shadow always tells the truth. Cracks hide, people lie, film doesn't. So when I first heard the story of Declan Halstead, a man who did exactly my kind of work, it landed on me like a dropped wrench. Declan spent his days finding the flaws no one wanted found. Then a routine morning, a routine X-ray of his 7-year-old son, put a stranger in a dark room with 6 pictures on a screen, and that stranger locked the door. What I want you to sit with today isn't just the horror of what those pictures showed. It's the discipline of the man who read them. Anybody can rage. It takes a certain kind of person to stay calm, to document, to build a case so clean that the people who hurt his boy convicted themselves. Stay with me to the end, because the way Declan sprung his trap is the most satisfying thing I've narrated in a long time. This is a story about flaws that leave a shadow, and about the ones who thought no one was reading the film. Declan Halstead had a saying he'd picked up from his father, and he repeated it to new hires until they rolled their eyes. Bone remembers. Film doesn't lie. Leon Halstead had been a pipeline welder turned inspector, a man who could look at a length of 40-inch steel and tell you where it would fail before it ever did. He taught Declan the trade the way other fathers taught fishing, patiently, on cold mornings, with his hands. By the time Leon died, Declan was one of the best industrial radiographers in the Ohio Valley, the man the refineries called when a weld had to be certified beyond doubt. His work was simple to describe and hard to do. He aimed radiation through steel and read the ghost image it left behind. A good weld looked like calm water. A bad one showed a hairline the eye would never catch. A crack, a pocket of gas, a slag inclusion sitting quiet inside the metal, waiting for the day it would tear a pipeline open. Declan found those. He photographed them, logged them, time-stamped them, and signed a report that could shut down a line worth millions. He had learned, young, that a defect you can prove is a defect no one can argue with. Proof was his religion. He lived in Kestrel, a mid-sized Ohio town wrapped around a river and a corridor of tank farms and pipe. And for a long time, he had a life that matched his temperament. Quiet, ordered, dependable. Then his marriage came apart, and order left with it. His wife was Kendra, and he had loved her the way steady men love bright women, gratefully and a little blindly. Kendra Halstead, née Delaney, was quick and warm and restless, and she had grown tired of a husband who worked nights on pipelines and came home smelling of developer chemicals and iron. The separation, when it came, was framed as amicable. They were not divorced yet, the papers sat half-signed, but she had moved out of the house they shared and into a renovated place across town, and the center of both their lives was a 7-year-old named Rowan. Rowan Halstead was a soft-spoken kid who liked to draw airplanes and take small machines apart. He had his father's habit of studying a thing before he touched it. Under the custody arrangement they'd worked out with lawyers and gritted teeth, Rowan lived weekdays with Kendra and came to Declan on weekends. Declan hated the arrangement and told himself it was temporary. He did not yet know what was happening on the weekdays, because Kendra had not moved into that renovated house alone. She had moved in with the man who renovated it. Colton Vassar ran a company called Vassar Restoration and Design, and he was, by every surface measure, exactly the kind of man who wins. He flipped luxury homes, drove a spotless truck, and could fill a room with charm the way heat fills a room. He'd met Kendra when she hired him to fix a leaking roof, and within months he was in her bed, in her house, and increasingly in her son's life. Declan had met him twice, and disliked him twice, though he could not have told you exactly why. Colton had a way of putting a hand on the back of Rowan's neck when he smiled. Friendly, proprietary, and Rowan would go very still under it. Declan noticed the stillness. He filed it away and did nothing, because that is what reasonable people are trained to do. He would spend a long time hating himself for that. The morning that changed everything started with a fall, or so the story went. It was a Saturday, one of Declan's weekends, and Rowan came off the school bus Friday evening already holding his left arm strangely against his body. Kendra's text explained it. Rowan tripped on the back steps at Colton's. Nothing serious. Keep an eye on it. Declan kept an eye on it for exactly one night. By morning, the boy's forearm was swollen and he cried when it was touched, and Declan drove him to Northgate Children's Hospital for an X-ray, expecting a cast and a cartoon splint and a story to tease him with when he was grown. He got none of those things. The imaging suite at Northgate was run that morning by a radiologist named Dr. Farah Ansari, a small, precise woman who read pediatric films the way Declan read welds, looking for the shadow that shouldn't be there. She ordered the forearm series, saw the fresh break, and then did what good radiologists do with a break in a small child. She looked at everything else. She ordered a skeletal survey, a full-body set of images that maps a child's bones the way a surveyor maps land. It is a quiet, standard, careful thing to do. It is also, sometimes, how the truth gets out. Declan sat in the waiting room and did the thing he did on job sites. He watched people's faces. He watched the technician come out of the reading room and not make eye contact. He watched a nurse glance at him and glance away. He had spent 18 years reading the small tells of people who had found something bad on the film and didn't want to say it yet. Every instinct he owned stood up at once. When Dr. Ansari finally came for him, she did not bring Rowan. She asked Declan to step into the reading room, and then she closed the door, and he would remember this detail for the rest of his life. She turned the small lock on the handle. "Mr. Halstead," she said quietly, "I need you to look at something with me, and I need you to stay calm, because your son is safe right now, and I intend to keep him that way." The room was dark except for the wall of light. On it, she brought up the forearm, the fresh green fracture, ugly but ordinary. Then she began adding images beside it, one after another, until 6 scans hung on the screen at once. Declan Halstead had read 10,000 radiographs. He did not need her to explain. He read them the way he read a failed weld, and the floor seemed to tilt under him. A rib, healed with the thick, lumpy callus of an old break. Another rib, the same. A shin bone with a spiral fracture, the kind that comes from a limb being twisted, not from a fall. A tiny chip at the end of the upper arm bone, the corner sheared clean, a pattern he half remembered from a safety course years ago as something that does not happen by accident. And each break sat at a different stage of healing. Fresh, weeks old, months old, older still, not one event, a calendar. He was looking at a timeline written in his son's bones. These injuries happened over months, Dr. Ansari said, her voice steady and very low. At least 5 separate occasions, likely more. The pattern, the corner fracture, the posterior ribs, the spiral, these are not the injuries of a clumsy child. I have to be honest with you, because I've watched your face for the last 10 minutes, and I believe you didn't know. Mr. Halstead, someone has been hurting your son, repeatedly, for a long time. Declan heard his own father's voice, from 1,000 cold mornings. Bone remembers. Film doesn't lie. I am a mandated reporter, Ansari went on. That means the moment I saw this, the law required me to make calls, and I've already made them. Child Protective Services and the police are on their way. But I wanted to talk to you first, because you are about to have to make choices very fast, and you need to make the right ones. She looked at him hard. Don't take him home tonight. Whatever the arrangement is, wherever home is for him during the week, do not take him back there. First call your lawyer, then call 911 yourself, so it's on record that you reported it too. Do you understand me? Home, Declan said. The word had come apart in his mouth. Home, for Rowan, weekdays, was the renovated house across town. Was Colton Vassar's hand on the back of a small neck. Was every Friday the boy came to him a little quieter than the Friday before. I understand you, Declan said, and something in him, the part that had spent a career staying steady while a pipeline hung on his signature, went very cold and very clear. Show me the dates. I need to know when each one happened. As close as you can. Ansari blinked. Of all the reactions she'd braced for, that wasn't one. Healing stages can be dated in ranges, she said slowly. Radiologically, it's not exact, but ranges are fine, Declan said. I work in ranges. Give me the film, and give me the ranges, and I'll give you the man. He did not go home that night. He never went home again. Not to that marriage, not to that house, not to the life where he'd told himself the boy's stillness was nothing. He walked out of Northgate Children's Hospital holding his son's good hand, and he began, very quietly, to build a case. The first 48 hours were a war fought in fluorescent hallways. Child Protective Services placed Rowan on an emergency hold in Declan's temporary custody. The abuse had not happened on his time, and his own films were clean, which the system could see as fast as he could. A caseworker named Marisol Trejo caught the file, a tired, sharp woman who had seen every version of this and still hadn't gone numb. A detective from the Child Crimes Unit named Don Petrosky caught it too. Between them, in a small beige room, they asked Rowan gentle questions while Declan sat where the boy could see him and said nothing, because he understood that his own rage would contaminate everything if it touched the story. Rowan didn't say much. Abused children rarely do. When she asked, carefully, whether anyone had ever told him not to tell, Rowan looked at his hands and said, "Colton says if I tell, the airplanes get taken away. And Mom says don't make Colton mad. And Mom says don't make Colton mad." That was the sentence that told Declan the shape of the thing. This was not one monster in the dark. It was a monster and a woman who had decided, over and over, that her comfort was worth her son's silence. Kendra had known, maybe not the X-rays, maybe not the exact anatomy of it, but she had known enough to coach a 7-year-old to keep a man's temper from turning. Declan had married her. He had trusted her with the most important thing he had. The betrayal had two faces, and he was going to have to look at both. That night, in his kitchen, Declan did the only thing that had ever kept him sane. He opened a fresh notebook, the same kind he used on job sites, and at the top of the first page, he wrote the 2 rules of his trade. Document everything. Prove it beyond argument. Then he began to work the problem the way he'd work a failing pipeline. Not with fury, but with method. He started with what he had, 6 radiographs and a range of dates for each. Fresh, this past week. 1 break roughly 2 weeks old. 1 around 6 weeks. 1 near 3 months. 1 close to 5 months. The oldest, the healed rib, better than 6 months back. He laid them out as a timeline, the way Dr. Ansari had, and he stared at it until it stopped being his son and started being data. It was the only way he could look at it at all. Then he began to gather the second data set, the one that would turn medical ranges into named days. Because Declan understood something about the man who had done this, that the man did not understand about himself. Colton Vassar was vain. Vain men leave records. Vassar Restoration and Design had a public feed, glossy and relentless, where Colton posted before and after photos of every luxury flip, time-stamped, geotagged, captioned with the smug pride of a man who needed to be admired. He posted from job sites. He posted from vacations. He posted. Declan realized as he scrolled back months with a growing chill. On the exact weekends, Kendra had texted apologies about Rowan being clumsy, or under the weather, or not up for the handoff. A canceled weekend here. A short, strange visit there. And every time, within a day or two, Colton had posted from somewhere sunny, some couple's getaway, some lake house, Kendra tagged and smiling, while a small boy was somewhere else with a fresh injury and a coached silence. Declan built a spreadsheet. 1 column for each radiographic date range. Next to it, every canceled or shortened weekend from 2 years of texts, which he still had, because he never deleted anything. Next to that, every geotagged post that placed Colton and Kendra together, away, unbothered, on those same days. The columns began to line up like tumblers in a lock, but he needed more than a timeline that lined up. A defense lawyer could call a lining up a coincidence. He needed the thing every radiographer needs, and rarely gets, a second independent method that produces the same answer. In his world, if the X-ray said a crack was there, you confirmed it with ultrasound, and when 2 different physics gave you the same flaw, no one could argue anymore. He needed the human equivalent. He needed a witness. He found her by accident, and her name was Marley. Marley Delaney was Kendra's younger sister, 19, still half a kid herself, who had spent the last year couch surfing between the Delaney family and Kendra's renovated house because rent was impossible and her sister had a spare room. Declan had always liked Marley. She was the only Delaney who'd treated him like a person during the split. He reached out to her carefully, not to accuse, just to say Rowan was staying with him for a while and to ask, gently, if she was okay. And Marley, who had been carrying something too heavy for a 19-year-old to carry alone, broke open like a seam under pressure. She had seen things. Not the worst of it. Colton was careful. He did the worst where no one watched. But she had seen the bruises Kendra explained away, had seen Rowan flinch when Colton raised his voice, had heard, Through a wall, a sound she had spent months telling herself was something else. She had said something once, to Kendra, and Kendra had told her to mind her own business and stop being dramatic if she wanted to keep sleeping under that roof. So Marley had done the thing frightened people do. She had gone quiet. But quiet, in Marley, had a specific texture. She had started keeping her phone recording in her pocket, telling herself she was crazy, telling herself she'd never use it, because some animal part of her knew she might one day need to prove she hadn't imagined it. She had 31 voice recordings, time-stamped. She had never played them for anyone. Declan did not ask to hear them. That was the discipline talking, the part of him that knew a chain of custody could be broken by one wrong move. Instead, he told her the truth about the 6 scans, and he watched her face do what his own had done in that dark reading room. Then he said, "Marley, I'm not going to touch your phone. I'm going to give you a name, and you're going to give that phone to her, exactly as it is, and tell her everything. Her name is Detective Dawn Petrosky. She'll know what to do with it, so that no one can ever say we tampered with it." Marley cried and agreed, and the second method clicked into place beside the first. He was building something now that could not be waved away, and he was doing it without ever once raising his voice, which was the part that would frighten Colton Vassar most of all, when he finally understood it. Because a shouting man is a man you can fight. A quiet man with a spreadsheet is a man who has already won and is simply waiting for you to arrive at the meeting. If Declan had thought the hardest part was behind him, the machinery of custody law corrected him fast. Kendra and Colton did not fold. They lawyered up, and they were good at it, and they came out swinging with a story of their own. Their version was simple and poisonous. Declan was an unstable, obsessive man, a father who worked with radiation and chemicals and had a temper he hid well, and the injuries, such as they were, could have happened anywhere, including on his weekends. They filed for the emergency hold to be lifted. They painted Marley as a jealous, unstable teenager with a grudge and a habit of lying. And they had a card Declan hadn't seen coming: money, and the people money can rent. The custody evaluator assigned to the case was a psychologist named Dr. Cass Farrow, and within a week, Declan understood that Farrow golfed at the same club where Colton did most of his networking, and had done consulting for a development company that turned out to be one of Colton's shells. Farrow's early notes, which Declan's attorney pried loose, leaned unmistakably toward the charming contractor and the concerned mother, and against the intense, watchful father with the strange, clinical way of talking about his son's bones. The system that had moved so fast to protect Rowan was now, through one rented man, tilting back the other way. Declan's attorney was a woman named Simone Bright, and she was the first person in this whole nightmare who made him feel less alone. She was blunt and fast and had spent a decade doing exactly this kind of case, and when she saw his spreadsheet, the radiographic dates, the texts, the geotagged posts, the map of a monster's calendar, she went quiet for a long moment and then said, "Declan, in 12 years, I have never had a father walk in with something this organized. Most of my clients bring me feelings. You brought me a forensic report." Then she frowned, "Which is exactly why they're going to attack you as cold. Juries and judges want a father who weeps. You give them a father who documents. We have to be careful." She was right, and it stung, because it was the same thing that had cost him a marriage, the steadiness that read to warm people as distance. But Declan had made his peace with what he was. He would not perform grief he was too busy to feel yet. He would do the thing he was good at, and he would trust the film to speak louder than any tears. Still, Farrow was a real problem, and money was a real problem, and Colton's confidence was growing. Declan could see it in the man's public feed, which he still monitored the way he'd monitor a pressure gauge. Colton had started posting little barbs, quotes about protecting your family from people who want to tear it down, a photo of himself and Kendra looking wounded and united. He was building a narrative too. The difference was that Colton was building his out of image, and Declan was building his out of evidence, and only one of those holds up under load. The break came from the direction Declan had learned to always watch: the money. Because here is the thing about a man who hurts a child, and a woman who lets him: they are almost never only that. Cruelty and greed grow from the same rot. Declan's father, Leon, had set up a trust for Rowan before he died, a modest but real fund from a life of union wages and careful saving, meant to put the boy through school. Kendra was a co-trustee, And when Simone Bright subpoenaed the trust records, standard, in a custody fight, the statements told a second story running underneath the first. The trust had been bled, not all at once, carefully, the way a smart thief steals, in transfers labeled as education expenses and enrichment and camp. The money had moved out of Rowan's future and into an account, and the account traced, through one thin shell called Ridgeline Equity, to Vassar Restoration and Design. Colton had been funding his luxury flips, in part, with a dead grandfather's gift to an abused little boy. And Kendra had signed off on every transfer. Declan sat with that for a long time, alone, at his kitchen table. He had thought his coldness was fully deployed already. He found there was another gear below it, because now the case had two engines. The abuse was a criminal matter, and it was strong. And it was getting stronger as Detective Petrosky worked Marley's recordings, and Dr. Beatrix Nunn, a child abuse pediatrician brought in as an expert, wrote a report calling the 6-scan timeline as clear a pattern of inflicted repetitive trauma as I have reviewed in 20 years. But criminal cases are slow and their outcomes uncertain, and in the meantime the custody fight was the field where Rowan's day-to-day safety would actually be decided. The financial fraud, though, the looted trust, was the thread that tied everything together, because it gave a motive. It destroyed the clumsy child story, and it proved that Kendra was not a misled bystander, but an active participant with her name on the transfers. Declan understood something else too, watching Pharaoh tilt and Colton preen, and Kendra hide behind her lawyer. He understood that if he came at them head-on, with everything too early, they would settle, spin, seal records, and slither into a plea that kept Colton out of prison and left Rowan's future a matter of supervised visits and lingering doubt. Charming, moneyed men escaped through the cracks all the time. Declan had spent his life finding cracks before they could be used. He was not going to leave them one. So he did the hardest thing of all, for a man who wanted to burn the world down. He waited. He let them think they were winning. He let Simone slow walk the custody proceeding. He let Pharaoh's biased report stand in the file, uncontested, so Colton and Kendra would believe the evaluator was theirs. He let their lawyers file their confident motions. He fed them, through the ordinary friction of the case, exactly the impression they wanted to have, that Declan was a cold, disorganized, emotional man who had gotten lucky with one alarming X-ray and would fall apart under real pressure. He even let a rumor drift back to them, through Marley, that he was thinking of dropping the criminal complaint if they'd just give him primary custody, the desperate bargain of a broken father. Colton, being Colton, could not resist a winner's lap. He got sloppy, his posts got smugger, and crucially, he did the one thing Declan had gambled he would do, believing the evaluator and the money had the custody hearing sewn up. He agreed to let the whole matter be decided at that hearing, on the record, with a judge, rather than dragging it out. He wanted his coronation. Declan had built him a stage and let him climb onto it. Behind the scenes, the real work went on. Simone quietly exposed Pharaoh's conflicts of interest to the court and requested a new, neutral evaluator, a motion she timed to be ruled on just before the hearing, so Colton wouldn't see his rented advantage vanish until it was gone. Detective Petrosky and Marisol Trejo built the criminal file in parallel, coordinating with the district attorney's office so that the moment the family court made its findings, an arrest could follow the same day. Dr. Nunn's report was finalized. Marley's recordings were authenticated. The trust's forensic accounting was locked, and Declan, radiographer to the bone, assembled the exhibit he had been building toward since the reading room, a single, devastating chart. On one axis, the 6 radiographs, each dated to its healing range by 2 independent pediatric radiologists. On the other axis, Colton Vassar's own time-stamped geotagged photographs and Kendra's own text messages, placing the two of them together, and Rowan alone with Colton, on the specific days that fell inside each range. 6 injuries, 6 windows, and in every single window, the abuser's own vanity had planted a flag that said, "I was here, the boy was with me, and here is the date." The medical timeline and the digital timeline were 2 different physics, and they gave the same answer. No one could argue anymore. The hearing was set. Declan spent the night before it not rehearsing a speech, but checking his exhibits the way he'd check his film before certifying a weld. For any flaw, any gap, anything a clever opponent could pry. He found none. He had built it beyond argument. He slept 3 hours and woke calm. The family courtroom in Kestrel was small and bright and smelled of old paper. Colton Vassar arrived in a suit that cost more than the courtroom's furniture, radiating the easy confidence of a man who had bought his way out of worse. Kendra sat beside him, dressed for sympathy, dabbing at eyes that Declan watched and did not believe. Their lawyer was polished and expensive. On Declan's side sat Simone Bright, a slim stack of binders, and Marley, pale and brave. And behind them, unremarked in the gallery, a woman Colton's lawyer did not recognize but would come to. An assistant district attorney, invited quietly, watching. It began the way Colton wanted. His lawyer painted the portrait, the devoted mother, the generous partner who'd stepped up for a boy whose father was married to his job, the unfortunate injuries of an active child, the obsessive ex-husband weaponizing a routine X-ray. He gestured, warmly, toward Dr. Farrow's evaluation, the centerpiece of their case, the neutral expert who had found the mother and her partner to be the stable, loving home. And the judge, an unshowy woman named Halverson who had run this court for 19 years, folded her hands and said, "Counsel, before you rely further on Dr. Farrow's evaluation, I ruled this morning on the petitioner's motion regarding the evaluator. Dr. Farrow has been removed from this matter for undisclosed conflicts of interest, including a financial relationship with an entity connected to Mr. Vassar. His report is stricken. You may not reference it." Declan watched the color leave Colton Vassar's face for the first time. He had seen that specific draining before, on the faces of foremen when he told them the weld they'd signed and celebrated had failed, and the whole line was coming down. It was the face of a man discovering that the ground he'd been standing on had never been there. Then Simone Bright stood up, and with the flat, unhurried courtesy of someone who has already won, she began to walk the court through Declan's chart. She put the 6 scans on the screen, all at once, the way Dr. Ansari had put them up for a father in a locked room months before. She let them hang there while she read Dr. Nunn's finding into the record. Inflicted, repetitive, unmistakable. Then, one window at a time, she laid Colton's own photographs beside his son's broken bones. This rib, healed 6 months. Here is Mr. Vassar's own post, time-stamped and located, that weekend, at a lake house, with a caption about family. And here is Miss Halstead's text, that Friday, canceling the boy's visit to his father because he was under the weather. This spiral fracture of the shin, roughly 3 months. Here is that weekend. Here is where Rowan was. Here is who he was with. Again, and again, and again. 6 times, the medical range and the digital flag agreeing, until the pattern was so total that the courtroom had gone silent in the particular way rooms go silent when everyone in them has understood something at once. And then, because the law required the second engine too, Simone turned to the trust. Leon Halstead's gift to his grandson, the transfers, the shell, the account. Kendra's signature on every one. A dead man's careful savings, meant to lift a boy up, funneled into the flips of the man who was breaking that boy's bones. When Simone read the total that had been taken, Kendra Halstead made a sound, and it was the first honest sound Declan had heard from her in 2 years. Detective Petrosky had been sitting in the gallery. So had the assistant district attorney. By the time the family court made its findings, sole legal and physical custody to Declan Halstead, all contact between Rowan and Colton Vassar permanently barred. A referral of Kendra's conduct to the criminal authorities, the machinery Declan had assembled in parallel, was already turning. Colton Vassar was arrested on the courthouse steps, in the good suit, in front of the phones he'd spent his life performing for. Kendra was charged as well, accessory to the abuse for the coaching and the cover, and, for the trust, felony theft from a protected fund. The recordings Marley had been too frightened to play for anyone became state's evidence. Dr. Nunn's report became the spine of the criminal case. And the chart, the 2 timelines that gave the same answer, became the thing prosecutors would later describe as the most airtight abuse timeline exhibit they had ever taken to trial. Colton Vassar, it turned out, had a past he'd sealed and buried. An earlier girlfriend, an earlier child, an earlier clumsy injury that had been pleaded down and hidden. The financial thread Declan pulled unraveled that too, because the same greed that had looted a trust had left a paper trail through the sealed matter, and once a judge saw the pattern, the seal came off. He was not a first-time anything. He was a repeating flaw, the kind that had been present in the metal all along, waiting, And no one had read the film until a small, precise woman in a dark room refused to look away, and a quiet father refused to rage until he could prove. Colton went to prison, and it was not a short number. Kendra took a plea that cost her the freedom she'd traded her son's silence to protect, and cost her, permanently, the right to be near him unsupervised. The trust was clawed back, restored to Rowan's name with Colton's seized assets making up the theft. And Rowan Halstead, 7 years old, went home, the only home he had left, the one with his father in it, the one where a man who read hidden flaws for a living had learned, too late but not fatally, to read the one flaw that mattered most. Declan kept the 6 scans. He had them, still, a copy, in a file, in the same drawer as his father's old inspection tools. Not to torture himself, to remember what he had almost missed, standing in a room, watching a small boy go still under a friendly hand, telling himself it was nothing. He had spent his life believing that a defect you can prove is a defect no one can argue with. He had been right. He had just needed to point the beam at his own life to see it. Bone remembers. Film doesn't lie. And neither, in the end, did the father. This is Nathan again. And I've told a lot of these stories, but this one stays with me, and I think I know why. We like to imagine that if something terrible were happening to a child we loved, we'd know. We'd feel it. But cruelty is quiet by design, and the people who commit it are experts at making sure the film never gets read. What saved Rowan wasn't a feeling. It was a routine X-ray. A radiologist who did the careful, standard, thorough thing when she didn't have to. And a father who, in the worst moment of his life, chose discipline over rage. I want to be careful here, because I don't want the lesson to be, stay cold. Declan's steadiness cost him a marriage, and nearly cost the read on his own son. The real lesson is smaller and harder. Pay attention to stillness. When a child goes quiet under someone's hand, that quiet is information. And when the truth finally shows up, on a screen, in a record, in a 19-year-old's shaking voice, believe it faster than Declan almost didn't. The other thing I keep turning over is the trap. Declan didn't win by being louder or angrier than the people who hurt his boy. He won by being patient enough to let them convict themselves, by trusting that documentation beats charm, that 2 independent methods agreeing beats any lie, that a vain man will always, always leave a record. There's something deeply satisfying in that, and I won't pretend otherwise. The people who thought no one was reading the film found out that someone always is. If this story got to you, and I hope it did, take one thing from it. The flaws leave a shadow. In metal, in bone, in the people who smile while they hurt someone smaller than them. Someone just has to be willing to look. Thanks for staying to the end with me. Take care of the quiet kids. I'll see you in the next one.